What if a group of gangsters cornered you on the subway, thinking you were an easy target, only to realize you had skills they weren't ready for? Like the video and subscribe for more content like this. The subway station smelled of rust and something stale, the kind of scent that lingered no matter how often the place was cleaned. It was late, way too late for anyone to be riding alone, but Soren Greaves didn't have much choice. His mother's night shift at the hospital meant he had to get himself home after his evening martial arts class, and the subway was the fastest way back. It wasn't the safest route, especially in this part of Atlanta, but Soren was used to keeping his head down, earbuds in, minding his own business. Tonight, though, he felt something was off the second he stepped onto the train. There were only a handful of passengers, mostly older folks who looked exhausted from long shifts. But in the far corner of the car, near the flickering overhead light, sat three guys who didn't belong. They weren't just tired workers. They were watching, waiting. Soren recognized the type instantly. He'd seen them around his neighborhood, always lurking at the edge of trouble. Dressed in dark hoodies, sneakers worn from running, and gold chains that caught the dim light, they sat too casually, their eyes too sharp. He didn't stare, didn't react, but his instincts told him everything he needed to know. They were hunting. 5 minutes later, Soren sat near the door, gripping his backpack tighter, angling himself so he could see their reflections in the scratched-up subway window. He counted 3 of them. One built like a linebacker, one wiry but fast-looking, and the third, the one in the middle, was the leader. The leader leaned over and murmured something to his crew. The wiry one cracked his knuckles. The big one adjusted his hoodie. Soren could feel it coming. It was the kind of quiet, creeping tension he'd trained to sense in the dojo. A coiled spring, seconds from snapping. 2 minutes later, the train slowed for the next station, doors hissing open. The few other passengers trickled out. The gangsters didn't. Neither did Soren. As the doors slid shut again, locking them in the moving car, the leader finally stood. He sauntered forward, hands in his pockets, grinning like a wolf. "Yo, little man," he drawled. "You got the time?" Soren didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched. The leader clicked his tongue. "Ah, you too good to talk to us." The wiry one snickered. The big one just cracked his knuckles. Soren sighed through his nose. They weren't asking for the time. They were testing him. The leader took another step forward. "I think you do got something for us, don't you?" His tone dropped, voice quiet, dangerous. "Why don't you go ahead and—" The subway jerked, a moment of unsteady footing, and Soren moved. The subway's sudden jolt threw off their balance, just for a second. But a second was all Soren needed. His body moved on instinct, drilled from years of training. He shifted his weight, planting his feet while the leader stumbled slightly. Soren didn't waste time. With a sharp pivot, he launched his backpack forward, slamming it into the leader's chest. It wasn't a knockout move, but it made the guy lurch back, surprised. His crew hadn't expected a reaction, let alone a first strike. "Yo, what the—" the wiry one blurted. Soren was already up, already reading the space around him. 3 attackers, limited room, subway seats boxing him in. He needed to stay mobile. The leader recovered fast, snarling. "Oh, you think you tough?" He ripped a switchblade from his hoodie. Soren's heartbeat slowed. Not in fear, but in focus. His instructor's voice echoed in his mind. Control the space. Control the fight. The big one lunged first. Wrong move. Soren ducked under his swinging arm and drove an elbow into his ribs. The guy grunted, stumbling, and Soren followed up with a sharp side kick to the knee. The bigger they are, the harder they fall, especially when you take out their legs. The wiry one came next, fast, wild. He threw a punch, but Soren saw it a mile away. He sidestepped, grabbed the guy's wrist, and twisted. The momentum sent the thug sprawling into a subway pole, hitting it hard with his shoulder. The leader cursed and slashed with the knife. Soren barely dodged. The blade whispered past his ribs. Too close. But now he knew. This guy didn't know how to use it properly. He was waving it, trying to scare him. Not a trained knife fighter. That made all the difference. Soren's pulse stayed even. He adjusted his stance, watching. The leader sneered. "What, you scared now?" Soren didn't answer. He just moved, a quick step forward. A trap. The leader reacted, jabbing the knife, exactly what Soren wanted. In a flash, Soren sidestepped, grabbed the leader's wrist and twisted hard. The knife clattered to the subway floor. Before the leader could recover, Soren's knee snapped up into his stomach. Hard. The air rushed out of the guy in a strangled gasp. His body folded. He dropped. Silence. The only sound was the subway rattling along the tracks. Soren took a slow breath, his muscles still buzzing with adrenaline. He stepped back, his eyes sweeping the three gangsters. The leader groaned, curled up on the floor. The wiry one cradled his wrist, face twisted in pain. The big guy was still on his knees, struggling to breathe. The fight was over, but Soren knew this wasn't finished. Not yet. 5 seconds later. Soren didn't relax. Winning a fight wasn't the same as being safe, not when you were trapped in a moving subway car with people who wanted payback. The leader coughed, trying to push himself up. His face twisted with rage. "You little—" Soren's foot shot out, pinning the guy's wrist to the floor. His other foot kicked the knife away, sending it sliding under a seat. The wiry one hesitated. The big guy still looked dazed. Soren met their eyes. Calm. Controlled. Daring them to try again. Nobody moved. The subway lurched, slowing as it approached the next station. Soren made a choice. He needed to get out. Fast. He glanced toward the doors, measuring the timing. The train screeched to a stop and the familiar chime rang out. Now. With a final, sharp look at the three thugs, Soren stepped back and bolted. 3 seconds later. He was off the train. He didn't sprint. Running too fast made you look scared, but he walked with purpose, blending into the thin, late-night crowd. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay loose, to move like nothing had happened. Behind him, the doors hissed shut. The train pulled away. Only then did Soren let out a slow breath. 1 minute later. He reached the escalators, taking them 2 steps at a time. His brain was still replaying everything. The strikes, the dodges, the way the leader's face twisted in shock when he lost the knife. Soren had been in fights before, but not like this, not life or death. At the top of the escalator, he adjusted his backpack, trying to shake the feeling that someone was watching. He wasn't safe yet. 5 minutes later. He was above ground, stepping onto a dimly lit street. His apartment was only 6 blocks away, but the city felt different tonight. Sharper. The air carried a weight, like something unseen was shifting in the dark. Soren had embarrassed those guys. That meant trouble. He needed to get home. Fast. But just as he turned the corner, a low voice made him freeze. "You got some nerve, kid." Soren's blood ran cold. He wasn't alone. Leaning against a lamppost, hands in his pockets, was a 4th guy. Older, taller, watching. Soren didn't recognize him, but he recognized the look. This was someone in charge. The man smiled, not friendly. "Did you really think it was over?" Soren's fists clenched. He wasn't out of danger yet. Soren didn't react right away. He just watched. Measured. The man in front of him wasn't like the 3 thugs from the subway. He carried himself differently. More controlled, more dangerous. His clothes were sharper, dark jeans, a fitted jacket, a thin silver chain that barely caught the glow of the street lamp. No flashy sneakers, no wild gestures. This wasn't some street-level punk. This was a predator. Soren adjusted his stance, subtly shifting his weight onto the balls of his feet. Ready. The man noticed. He smirked. "You got skills, I'll give you that," he said, stepping away from the lamppost. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. Most kids would have folded the second Jake pulled that knife. But you? He let out a low chuckle. "You're different." Soren didn't answer. Talking was a trap, a way to distract. The man tilted his head. Smart, too. That's rare. The street was too empty, too quiet. No one was coming to help. Soren's mind raced. He had two options, fight or run. If he ran, would the guy chase? Probably. Would he be faster? Maybe. But Soren didn't know if this man was alone, if he had backup waiting, if he fought. Could he win? The man sighed as if reading his thoughts. Relax, kid. If I wanted to hurt you, we wouldn't be talking. Soren didn't relax. The man took another step forward. Not close enough to attack, but close enough to make a point. You made a mistake back there. His voice was still calm, still smooth. You humiliated them, made them look weak. He let the words sink in. You know what that means, don't you? Soren's jaw tightened. Yeah, he knew. You hurt their pride, the man continued. And guys like them, they don't let that slide. He shrugged. If it was up to me, I'd let it go. You earned that win. But Jake, not a chance. Jake, the leader from the subway. Soren's pulse thudded. This was bigger than some random mugging. The man slipped a hand into his pocket. Soren tensed, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, held it out. Take it. Soren didn't move. The man exhaled, shaking his head like he was dealing with a stubborn little brother. It's just an address. Soren took it, warily. The man's smirk returned. You're gonna want to know where they'll be looking for you. Chills ran down Soren's spine. The man turned to leave, calling over his shoulder. See you soon, kid. Soren swallowed hard, staring at the paper in his hand. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. 5 minutes later, Soren sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the folded paper in his hands. He hadn't opened it yet. His apartment was dark except for the dim glow of the streetlights outside. His mom wouldn't be home for another few hours, but even if she were, he wouldn't tell her. She worried enough as it was. His fingers tightened around the paper. Part of him wanted to rip it up, throw it away, pretend none of this ever happened. But he knew better. That guy, whoever he was, wasn't lying. Jake and his crew wouldn't just forget what happened. Not in a city like this. Not in their world. Soren exhaled slowly and opened the paper. There was no name, no explanation, just an address. South Side. Soren's stomach sank. That was deep in gang territory. His first instinct was to avoid it. Stay away. Keep his head down. But that wouldn't work, would it? They'd come looking for him. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow. But they would. And when they did, he wouldn't get the luxury of choosing the time or place. Soren wasn't stupid. He knew how the streets worked. If he wanted to control what happened next, he had to act first. He pulled out his phone and did a quick search. The address led to an abandoned warehouse. His chest tightened. A trap. Of course it was a trap, but if they thought he'd just walk in blind, they didn't know him at all. Soren set his phone down, mind racing through everything he'd learned in the dojo. His teacher always said the best fighters weren't just strong or fast. They were smart. Don't fight on their terms. Make them fight on yours. If they wanted to set a trap, fine. Soren would just have to spring it first. 12 hours later. It was just past midnight when Soren arrived at the warehouse. He stayed in the shadows, moving quietly along the side of the building. The place was massive. Rusted metal siding, broken windows, and graffiti covering every surface. But there were signs of life. A single black car parked nearby, a cigarette still burning on the ground. Someone was inside. Soren crept closer, keeping low. His heart pounded, but he pushed it aside. He had a plan. He wasn't just here to fight. He was here to end this. For good. Inside the warehouse. The air was thick with the scent of oil and rust. Dim overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Soren kept low, slipping in through a broken side door. His footsteps were silent. He had no intention of walking straight into whatever trap they'd set. He could hear them before he saw them, voices echoing through the empty space. He's gonna show. He has to. That kid. Man, after last night he's probably hiding under his bed. Jake's voice cut through the others, sharp with anger. Number. He's not dumb. He knows what happens if he runs. Soren peered around a rusted metal beam. 4 of them. Jake, the wiry one from the subway, and 2 new faces. Guys just as rough-looking, just as ready for trouble. He frowned. Where was the man from last night? He didn't have time to dwell on it. They were armed. One of the new guys had a baseball bat. The wiry one had a knife, probably a replacement for the one he lost on the train. The last one just cracked his knuckles, looking eager to break something. Jake sat on a crate, flipping a lighter open and shut. His bruised ribs were probably still aching from their fight, but his eyes were locked on the warehouse entrance, waiting. Soren exhaled slowly. He wasn't going to give them the fight they expected. Make them fight on your terms. Moving fast, Soren grabbed an old wrench off the floor and hurled it across the warehouse. It clanged against a metal pipe. Instantly, all 4 heads snapped toward the noise. What was that? Soren didn't wait. While their backs were turned, he moved, silent, swift. He was behind them before they even knew he was in the room. Jake spun just as Soren struck first, a precise kick to the back of his leg. Jake buckled. The others reacted fast, but Soren was faster. The knife-wielding thug lunged, but Soren sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted hard. The knife clattered to the ground, and Soren followed up with a sharp elbow to the jaw. Out cold. The bat came swinging next. Soren ducked, rolled, and came up inside the guy's guard. A brutal palm strike to the throat sent him choking to the floor. The last guy hesitated, just for a second. But that was enough. Soren's foot snapped up, catching him square in the ribs. He crumpled, gasping. Jake was the last one standing. He staggered up, fists clenched. You! Soren didn't let him finish. One last strike. One last hit. Jake went down. Hard. The fight was over. Soren stood in the silence, breathing steady. He hadn't just won. He'd ended it. And next time? They'd think twice before coming for him. Soren walked onto that subway thinking he was just another passenger, an easy target. But in life, appearances can be deceiving. His skills turned the hunters into the hunted, proving that preparation beats intimidation. Strength isn't just about power, it's about control, strategy, and knowing when to strike. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notification to be the first to know when the next story drops.